Chapter 30. Ivory. John Hamman, 24. 1900, 19/8000 BC. They reappeared in their own time. It was night here as well, a dark, cloudy one, with mist closing in around them. John looked around in the pool of light thrown by their 2 lanterns. They, along with all their belongings, were all there. He could not tell if they were in the same place from which they had left. It was some hours before the horizon began to lighten, and even longer before the rising sun burned away the morning mist. John was worried for the injured man. They needed to get him back to Nairobi, to a doctor, but he had no idea when Blix would return. He also had nothing he could actually show for their time there. He had no ivory. John looked over at the crates and all the liquor remaining. He tried to estimate how much longer they would last, even at the prodigious rates of consumption that someone like Blix was capable of. He did not like the answer. He did not think they could expect him for at least another 2 weeks. John turned to Manny.
How long till Blix comes back?
No time soon, Bwana.
Manny was not smiling when he said this.
How many elephants would Blix shoot on a trip like this?
John needed to keep up their cover.
Sometimes none, Bwana. Sometimes many. Sometimes 3 or 4 bulls.
He said, with a shrug that seemed to indicate the randomness of life. They would have to go hunting, but first they must do their best for their man. John told Manny to have half the tents pitched, including the big one. 3 of the men would stay here with their injured companion. The rest of them would hunt for ivory. John told him to make sure the Maasai stayed in camp as they would need him. With that, he pitched in on the setup. Trying to make sure the injured man was as comfortable as possible, John left him lying on his own cot in the big tent in the care of his companions. John gathered everyone else a short distance away. He asked Manny to explain that they were going to hunt for ivory now, but they would do it a little way away from there. He thought they had a better idea of what was coming this time. They did not seem scared and waited passively. He set only the first working dial. This had been his plan all along. The land might be almost hunted out today, but it might be easier going back, say 10,000 years ago. The sun was higher in the sky, and the land had changed. What had been a sea of grass, with a few patches of trees, was now much greener. It might have been the season. Everything was greener, as if the rains had just ended, but there were also far more trees. The few small stands of trees of his own time were much more common here, larger and denser. John turned to Manny and asked him to tell the others they would hunt elephants here. He hoped there were elephants in this time. He wasn't sure he could explain a mammoth tusk. He was sure someone would notice a difference. They set up camp as the Maasai set out to scout the area. They had breakfast ready when he returned. Manny once again consulted with him and came to John with a very big smile on his face.
He say there are many elephants here, Bwana. Many, many. He say there are bulls with big ivory. Very big, Bwana. He say there's good hunting here. He say there is water here. Many water holes.
John thought about this. This must be a wetter time. The land seemed more fertile.
This is good. We will hunt here.
John made this pronouncement as if he had known this, and it had been his plan all along. Manny's smile was so broad, John thought the top of his head might fall off. They set out after breakfast, Manny and John following the Maasai. It didn't take long. In a nearby stand of trees, about a half-mile away, a herd of elephants were feeding. The men could hear them within the stand. They were feeding, which meant they were tearing the branches off the trees or simply pushing the entire tree over to get at the succulent leaves. The noise was tremendous. John tried to get Manny to ask the Maasai the number of elephants, but Manny simply answered, "Many." John thought on what to do. He wasn't sure going into the stand with only one big gun and an unknown number of elephants was a good idea. Actually, he was pretty sure it was a bad idea. Maybe it would be better to try for them at or on their way to the watering hole. If they were feeding, they would need to drink soon, right? He tried to get Manny to ask the tracker where the nearest watering hole was. He pointed to the grove. The Maasai could smell a waterhole in the grove as the wind blew gently toward them. John couldn't smell a thing, but took his word for it. That complicated things. He'd thought it had been a rather good idea and was miffed that the world wasn't cooperating. He had a gun and pockets full of cartridges. If he was going to be a great white hunter, it was time for John to get on with it. He took the big gun from Manny. John handed him the Mauser, but it was hardly useful in this. He didn't think the elephant would even feel the smaller round. He tried to recall what Blix had told him as they moved into the grove, but he had been very drunk. Blix had been adamant that John should not put too much faith in his 500. Even as one of the biggest guns in the world, it could not take an elephant without proper shot placement, and most of the shots he described were small targets. He had said that John should not try to take an elephant from the front with a headshot, even with the 500. It was all bone. Ignore the old story about between the elephant's eyes. Try to spot the ear holes on the side and draw a line between them. If the head is angled at all to the side, you are almost certain to ruin the ivory on one side or the other. The tusk extended far up into the skull. He warned John, if you flub that shot, the elephant could literally walk away, ignoring the bullet in its head or charge forward and stomp him into paste. The only time Blix tried for a frontal was if it charged, and then,
"Well, you might as well try."
his drunken shrug imparted no confidence. It was much better to try to take the beast from the side. He said you could aim for the ear. He didn't favor brain shots at all. Blix preferred to shoot for the heart and lungs broadside. It would not drop it like a headshot, but it would die, and it was more forgiving of the angle. By aiming behind the foreleg, at the tip of the crease where it met the body, about a third of the way from the bottom, you were likely to get a good hit. In a last ditch, he talked about trying to hit its spine above the tail or the hip as it runs away. He also spoke of many an elephant's ass disappearing into the jungle, never to be seen again. As they moved into the grove, they found a trail, probably leading to the waterhole within. The Maasai went in front of them, studying the tracks. He froze in place, looking at one of them. They came up beside him, and he pointed with the back end of his spear. One of the tracks was larger than the others. Manny pointed it out, the fine dust capturing the details of the deeper ridges of the large calluses worn down on the heel.
Bull, Bwana.
The tracks were fresh in the soft powder. They had their quarry. Moving in, they could hear the animals feeding, but it was hard to place their location. They heard one trumpet. Manny moved next to John and whispered in his ear.
Cow.
The sight lines quickly became very short. They could not see more than 15, maybe 20 yards. The tracker froze. John followed his gaze to the left, but saw nothing. They slowly moved up next to him. John wouldn't have seen it if it had not moved. It was huge, but it blended into the background. All he could see was a patch of skin through the greenery. They moved to the right and got a better look. John had never seen anything like it. If he hadn't seen the dinosaurs, he would have been overwhelmed, but they were so close. He couldn't reach out and touch it, but he could see the pebbly surface of its skin. Manny put his hand on John's shoulder, breaking the spell, and gently pulled him back. They retreated.
Cow. Bwana.
The tracker led them deeper toward the pool at the heart of the grove. As they got closer, the Maasai stopped and crouched. The rest of the group did the same. John listened harder than he ever had before. He heard the beating of his own heart, but then he heard it. He wasn't sure what it was at first. Then Manny raised his hand beside his ear and slowly made a strange waving gesture, rotating his hand back and forth. Then John realized what it was. They were hearing the sound of the elephants flapping their great ears back and forth to cool the blood running through them. The tracker knelt and pointed forward with his spear. It was time. John crept forward as quietly as he could. Manny shadowed him. John did not know what he intended to do. The tracker came behind them. As they got closer, they stepped to the side so they would be in slightly heavier cover and peeked out of the brush into a small clearing containing a watering hole. It still had some water in it, but it was reduced in size, more than half dry. That left a muddy bank all around. 2 elephants stood by the water hole. The great bull was there, a true jumbo, and a smaller animal, one of the cows. His tusks were huge and curved. John had no idea how to guess their weight. They were facing each other. The hunters had them broadside. The bull was at a slight angle toward them. He had not spotted them yet, but John realized they needed to act quickly before he smelled them. John slowly raised the rifle, trying not to draw attention to himself. He thought about the earshot, but remembered what Blix had said. He aimed at the top of the crease behind the bull's left shoulder. John hesitated, but then the trigger broke, and the gun roared, shoving him back. He tried to bring the barrels down again and get back on the sights. The beast had not moved much, backing up but not really changing the shot. He aimed a little farther forward for the shoulder. The big double roared again, and the bull bellowed as he fell on his side. The cow trumpeted wildly, and all of a sudden they heard echoing calls from what seemed all around them. There were a lot of elephants in this grove. The cow was desperately trying to lift the bull back onto his feet with her tusk and trunk. The sight was piteous. John had never imagined animals could feel that way. He heard crashing coming toward them and dropped flat in the bushes, hoping he would not be seen. It must not have been too bad an idea, as he saw his companions had done the same. It seemed like the cows of the herd streamed into the clearing from all directions. Soon, a dozen elephants surrounded the bull. They managed to lift him onto his feet. He stood unsteadily, and surrounded by the cows of the herd, he began to move off at a limping gait, his staggering body being held up by his lovers on either side. They crashed away through the trees, flattening them in a wide trail. John stayed there with his gun empty. He should have reloaded it when he had the chance. He got up and stared around. Opening the gun and ejecting the empty cases, he reloaded with 2 more solids. He couldn't help but think about the expense and the rate he was going through them. The steel-jacketed lead bullets were so much more expensive than any ammunition he had ever bought at home. Nothing else could penetrate deep enough, breaking through the heavy bones to strike home in the animal's vitals. He thought about the beast he had seen in the deep past. He must find an even larger gun. Even the 500 felt paltry against the behemoth he had seen there. John had shot an elephant, but was not sure what to do now. He knew he hit it, and probably in a good spot, but even after emptying his gun into the beast, it had walked away. The 500 did not seem so big anymore. The tracker moved forward to where the bull had been. The rest came up behind to see what he was looking at. He pointed with his spear at a spray of blood on the foliage. Manny smiled broadly.
Sneeze, Bwana.
If he was spewing blood out of his trunk when he breathed, then John had gotten him in a lung. They had the kill. All they had to do was be patient. John took the canteen from the pocket on his belt. Without thinking, he offered it to Manny and the Maasai. They declined. He took a long swig from it and tried again. Now Manny accepted it and took a small swig from it very formally. Then the Maasai did the same, as if it had some greater meaning. As he was putting the canteen away, John realized that this was the first time he'd ever shared a drink with a black man. They moved away from the watering hole into a more anonymous part of the forest. They waited a good hour, surely more than long enough for the bull to expire. The tracker led the way. They moved slowly, not sure what they would find. The bull was lying on its side to the right of the trail they had broken through the forest. All the vegetation around it was flattened, as if the whole herd had milled around it, circling their bull. The odor of urine was strong. At first, John thought the bull's bladder had let go. But no, the bull was covered in it. It looked like every member of the herd had urinated on the big bull. He had not expected to see that. The beast was very dead, surrounded by a pool of foamy blood that had been blown from his trunk. Still, it was impressive and majestic even in its death. Butchering it was difficult. The tusk had to be carefully chopped from the animal's head. Manny did the work himself, not trusting the ivory to any of the men. The tusks extended almost 2 feet into the skull, and the bone had to be carefully chopped around it to free it. They were more than 5 feet long even before they were cut from the skull, 7 after they were freed. They were 20 inches in circumference at the widest point. They must have approached 100 pounds a side of ivory. They went back to their small camp. John worried about the man they had left behind in the future. He wanted to get this over with so they could return to him. They ate great steaks of elephant that night. They were slightly gamey and reminded him of venison. Over the next week, they hunted and bagged another bull elephant every day, which was almost unheard of. John never tried to split his shots to get a second, at least intentionally. He did not feel he could risk it with only a single gun. He did take one of them with a single shot from the side. It was standing still with a perfect shot at the ear. John decided to try for it, and it dropped flat as if a giant had poleaxed it. That was good, because what came next gave him a real scare. John heard a crashing from their left and turned to see one of the cows charging them with her head down. He drew a bead on the center of its head, above the eyes, and fired. He was rushed and hadn't prepared for the recoil. It put him on his ass, and he looked up in time to see the elephant's back end collapse under it. And then the front half of the animal came crashing down. John tried to reload the rifle, but his arm was numb and didn't seem to want to work. Fortunately, his shot had been true. The only other time he tried for a headshot was out of necessity. They were trying to get a shot on a lone bull they had been tracking all day. He never seemed to stop moving and had led them on a merry chase. They finally found him, but were having trouble getting a good shot. The men had gotten quite close during all of this, and the beast either caught wind of them or saw them. Suddenly, he was facing the hunters all flared up, his ears spread wide. They weren't 20 yards apart, with the bull prancing sideways and shaking its head, trumpeting. John wasn't sure where to aim. Then the bull lowered his head, preparing to charge, and John fired. The bull stepped back as if stunned, but did not drop. He had missed. The beast turned, and as John brought the gun down again, he fired into the ear. The whole body jerked, and the elephant fell on his side, as dead as a sack of potatoes. That was when John realized the value of a double. He could never have made that second shot if he had to work any type of action. John had enough for the moment. They had collected the ivory from 8 elephants. None of the bulls were less than 80 pounds a side, and the largest must have been 140 pounds. The cow was smaller at 60 pounds a side, but still respectable. They gathered everyone around in the center of their camp and triggered the device, returning them to their own time. It was night, and on the open plain, John could see the fire of their men less than half a mile distant. He had instructed them to keep it burning night and day. They left the ivory stacked in a pile and made their way to the light in the darkness. John was glad they had returned. The injured man was not doing well. The jaws and claws of the dinosaur that attacked him had been dirty and carried some kind of sickness. The wounds were not closing, and the skin around them was red and raw. Infection had set in. John thought back to all the men in the war who had died in the hospitals, consumed by sickness within their wounds. They had washed the injuries with gin and changed the bandages, but the sickness had already taken root. Manny spoke to the tracker, and he turned, disappearing into the night. John did not know what to do for the injured man. They were stranded in the middle of the Masai Mara, a week's travel on foot from the nearest hospital, and he was not sure when Blix would return to take them back to Nairobi. Perhaps if they could get the man back to a doctor, they could cut away the sickened tissue to allow it to heal. Sometime later, the Masai returned with a large pile of dung carried in his hands. Crouching by a lantern, he started to pull it apart, picking something out and putting it in his hand. He returned to the man on the cot, and John saw that he held a bunch of maggots in his hand. Manny removed the bandages, and the Masai began to put the maggots in the man's wounds. John wanted to object, but had no idea what to do. He had nothing else to offer. All they could do was wait, make sure he drank enough water, and try to get him to eat. The next day, they fetched the ivory back to the camp. All the men were pleased, but John's mind returned to the injured man. He had known these people for less than 2 weeks, but he already felt responsible for them. The man had almost died on John's trip into the past, and he might still pay the price for it. Over the next few days, they stayed in the camp. The man did not die, but he was still bedridden. They made sure he had water to drink, and he managed to take some stew. By the end of the week, the wounds seemed to be improving. The Masai added more maggots every day. They consumed the dying flesh, and with it, the infection. At the end of the week, they were able to pick the maggots out of the wounds and rebandage them. None of this seemed to have pained him, but John gathered that he could feel them squirming inside him. He was able to sit up now. John was beginning to hope he might live, but he would bear the scars for the rest of his life. Manny brought John a necklace with one of the claws from the dinosaur that attacked their camp. It was a big hooked thing about 4 inches long. It hung from a leather cord. He very solemnly hung it around John's neck, and John tucked it into his shirt. Later, he noticed the man who had been attacked had one around his neck as well. Some other odds and ends seemed to be popping up in the dress of the men. An odd bone here, a tooth there, decorating anything from their clothing to their hair. Feathers seemed to be popular too. John wondered if that would become a problem, but they were all rather inconspicuous. They didn't really look that strange.